Hello, everyone, and hello, Javier. Javier Rivera, if you don't know already, has a great YouTube channel. I strongly recommend that you go and check out his videos. He has one of the things that you have been doing is that dating series, a series about dating and relationships, trying to bring more awareness and more maybe theory into the ideological underpinnings of current dating models. What is it? What are the worldviews that are operating in the background as we engage in dating? Things like that. You also have a relatively more recent series going through anti-Oedipus chapter by chapter or part by part, which is a heroic endeavor. But what I really enjoy, one of the things that I really enjoy about your channel is this openness of it. And maybe we can talk about it. One of the videos that the video that is the motivation for this conversation, why I invited you to talk about this, was your video about anger and the expression of anger in relationships and how that could be an unpleasant experience for the person who is expressing that anger. I recently had a similar experience that I can tell you about during the conversation. But the moment that I really fixated on was the moment that you said, you were telling a story and then you said, and I said something. I finally said something. And like, wow, I really relate to that moment. It's the moment of revelation, the moment of the point of no return. You crossed that boundary. You said something, and then the rest is, it depends on the other person too. So any thoughts so far?
Yeah, it's always, you could say I always dread that. I know it's a point of no return. Like I'm very conscious of that point of no return, and that is perhaps why I'm always I feel very resistant against my own anger, because I know that once I make this crossing, there's no coming back from this. Like everyone's gonna see me upset. The person's gonna acknowledge that I am upset, and it's one of those emotions, you could say, that I quickly associate with guilt and shame right after, and yes, the point of where I was like, I finally said something. Yeah, it's one of those situations where, like you could say, like the past flashes in just mere seconds, like just a series of every single moment that I was told by someone else on why didn't you say something, or or just like those more very cliche type of sayings that perhaps they still do have some truth to them, where it's like, if you don't say something, or you don't stand up for yourself in some kind of fashion, then people will just step on you, right? I think my mother even told me this herself. And so like all these moments flash in just mere seconds, and it builds up to the point of me finally saying something, right? So
yeah,
it's a weird experience.
it is both the expression and the non-expression. So both saying something and not saying something could bring guilt, because if you don't say anything, you're guilty. I also feel guilty for like, oh, am I letting people step on me? Or, am I not being assertive enough? Am I not defending what I'm supposed to be defending, myself included? And if I do express, then it's another kind of guilt about the experience of the other person. And I think, okay, here's another branch that we can go on. You talked about guilt and shame, but we can also talk about the freshness of an emotional experience. So I've met people in my life who are very good at expressing anger because they have done it a lot. Just like how there are people who are very good at expressing sadness, and they're like, they have the whole routine, laid out, like they know where to start crying and when to stop crying, which is to say that it is not an out of control emotion for them. It is not, because they've done it they're so good at it. They've done it so many times. And I think every person has an emotion like that they have expressed a lot. They're good at expressing, And when an emotion is maybe ambiguous or a situation is ambiguous, they kind of fall back on that emotion that they're good at expressing. They resolve ambiguity to that comfortable emotion. But anger is not one of those, for me at least, and it doesn't sound like it is one of those. So what that means is that because it is not practiced and rehearsed, there's a purity in it. It's like really, it's really pure. It is unrehearsed. You haven't practiced it, and it's not something that you're in control. You will not control it. So you just let it happen. You let it come out. And the contradiction is that it is not controlled, but in a sense, it is you, even though you are not doing it, or you are not overseeing its process of unfolding. But what ends up happening is you have to be responsible for it. It's like it has your badge.
Yeah.
And that makes it difficult. You can't say, oh, it just happened. You know, I don't know what happened. I mean, we can say things like that, but there's truth to it. And that truth is a personal truth, which is difficult to escape.
Yeah, there's definitely, I never looked at it that way in terms of like purity, but that is true. It is very pure in the sense that I never, it's not something that it happens often. It's not something that accumulates or happens often. And I think that's perhaps, something to do with just like my typical openness, that typically I'm always very expressive and venting, but there are just moments where, the anger itself, and I think I intentionally vent and daily or whatever in whatever way possible for myself, so that way I don't have an accumulation of anger randomly one day. But I noticed that it doesn't matter, even if I do this, there's still going to be those just random moments in your life, like the situation that happened to me, where it wasn't something that could have been prevented in terms of like accumulation. It was just a specific moment and a specific act that I did not like at all. And that right there is when it was a revelation in the sense for myself of, I realized that this isn't something that I can necessarily prevent. And it raised a lot of questions about why am I so obsessed about preventing this type of anger? Why am I so afraid to express it? And in some ways, I think I said this in my video too, I always admired the people that do get angry a lot, because they just know how to act with it. And for me, I said this also in the video, where it's not about just expressing my anger, but it's the very awkward after effects of being angry, right? Because when I'm the anger makes you jump out of your shell, right? It breaks everything. And then all of a sudden you get really big, right? I just imagine myself like a little character. I get really, really big. And then right after I'm done with my, tantrum or whatever, I just shrink. And you feel so, I feel like that, for me, that is the worst feeling right after. It's the tininess, helplessness, everybody saw you do this. Or your friends, and they say things like, because it's so pure, right? They say things like, I've never seen you act like this before, right? It's not rehearsed. I can't believe, I mean, these are actually words that I've heard through growing up. I've never seen you act like this. I've never seen you this mad before, stuff like that.
It's not like you. It's
yeah,
not like
exactly.
you. Yeah.
And it further reinforces the idea that it's not like me.
Right. And maybe even it's not me, maybe it's that like a build up of something like a shadow, the parts that we leave behind. My recent experience, and the reason why I related to your video even more than I would have, was something between me and a friend. It happened, the friend that I very, very much value and I want to keep in my life did something. And I thought, normally I don't express that I'm upset when somebody does something like that. What I do usually is like this: I distance myself. I let the relationship or friendship just dwindle, and like I let it fade. It's like my disappointment kind of results in a kind of not. It doesn't go back into the friendship to inform the friendship and kind of like bring some problems and to resolve. So I avoid that. But in this case, I thought, I'm going to say something. And when I said something, I was angry when I was talking, and I explicitly said that maybe I am overly sensitive about this issue. Maybe I am someone who reacts, who takes it out of proportion. But I just want to tell you, I'm upset by what you did, and I don't want it to affect our friendship. And similar to you, my anger subsided. And then I realized, okay, this thing is now the elephant in the room. I can't take it back. It is there, and it is going to have a continuing effect on how my friend thinks about me and how I'm going to behave towards him in the future. And like that feeling of, okay, the emotion has passed, but the thing that I expressed is still there. It is like a third party in our conversation. And I have to take responsibility for it. It's something that I created. It's something that allowed to come out. And that is similar, I think, to what you described in terms of, okay, I got that big expression out, but then I go back to my default position, but the expression is still part of the memory of our interactions, and I have to keep it. So that's a challenge, I think. The challenge is that you create an element, introduce an element into the relationship, or especially if you want to keep the friendship or relationship, if you want to continue going with it, you have to continue to work with this new element now. And it would certainly not help if this person just says, okay, that thing that you just did is not you, so I'm going to ignore it. That would be really bad on their part.
Yeah, it's oh man, it reminds me. I had another similar incident. It's always interesting because when I have those moments of anger, they always become events, not just like little moments. I mean, it's always interesting for the people that get angry often. It's just like, that's just, they just get upset, they'll get over it.
Yeah.
But it's like people like me where they never really see me angry. So it becomes like an event. It's like, did you see the time that Rivera got upset, and so on. But yeah, I had a similar one with a friend. It was a very close friend. It was a very close friend, and it was one of those things that I was trying my best to avoid. But unfortunately, it got to its peak, and I thought I had cooled down enough, and it's still, the words that were still left afterwards, right? Like what you said, the things that were still left behind from what I said when I was angry, I can tell it's still very much a part of that relationship now. Right? It's still very much a part because it was something that was said and it was taken as significant by the other person. And, that's something that I just have to accept, that I said that's what I said. And then the regrets afterwards is like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, but I'm not going to not take responsibility for it. I did say it, and so on. But fortunately enough, we're still friends. So, but the relationship did change afterwards. It did change. You could say maybe now there's a little bit of a boundary. And so he knows what will upset me now to some degree. But still, it's one of those things that's like, even though they know it's the boundary, it's the words, the words, like you said, it's a third party that still kind of maybe haunt the relationship or so on.
Yeah, boundaries is a great consequence. It could be very useful to draw boundaries, protective boundaries, uh, and anger is a kind of something that makes those boundaries visible and makes them official. Do you think for people like us, it is useful to just like seek out opportunities for expression of anger, to get more practice, and to kind of like not just to attack other people, but to kind of welcome that part of ourselves in, to welcome this angry side in, like, come in, you're one of us. You can have a voice, and I'm going to let you practice for a while on a bunch of like unfortunate people.
Uh, yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think I think for me, it's a question about finding. I guess instead of it's weird to say this, but it's like finding a more authentic way of my being angry in terms of like I have found a way to be sad, and I have found a way to be all other types of emotion. But you could say anger is one of those things I have not found a way to be in. And I think that is something that has to be practiced. And so, ironically enough, I think philosophy has made it to where I am more disagreeable
Mm,
and I can critique things more often. But this is a useful skill because I can engage myself into a conversation and be more disagreeable. And for me, it's not about being right, but it's more about practicing my disagreeability
mhm,
and critiquing. Because if I'm practicing myself in a position of being disagreeable, then when my anger comes along, I can finally say something,
mhm,
and I think that's why that video was so significant for me, because that was a real moment that I really did say something in the moment of being angry, which
mhm,
is not something that is typically done. It might be something said after me being angry, in everything else, but to be angry and then say something within that anger,
mhm,
it's something that I think philosophy has helped in terms of, you know, expressing
mhm,
that, to express some kind of disagreeability.
mhm, mhm. I think for me, one of the big reasons for having that practice is to remove that qualification. Finally, I would get to a place where hopefully I can uh, assert my disagreeableness, not finally, but like in the beginning or when the time comes, at the appropriate time. Because when I avoid doing that, when I postpone doing that, or when I deny the necessity of doing it, what ends up happening is that it gets excessive. And then I get to a point where I finally say something and it is excessive, and it is exactly that excess that is justifying the expression. I'm only saying it because it's like it's explosive now. I can't contain it anymore. So if I say it maybe earlier, it can be not excessive but more controlled, and it can also come out at the right place towards the right people. Another thing that I regret the most about my anger is that when I contain it, sometimes it comes out in the wrong places, like getting angry at a stranger on the bus, and which I would regret. Like, that guy didn't do anything to me. Why would he be the? Why should he be the recipient of something that I kind of gathered inside me because of some other reasons? And I think if I don't control it, it will come out in ways that are less desirable,
Mm,
or maybe even less ethical.
mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
uh, but let's talk about its relationship with the truth. Now that you also mentioned philosophy, what is it that makes us inclined, that disincentivizes us from expressing emotions? Is it a desire for consistency? Is it a desire for being predictable in the eyes of the other person? Uh, is it maintaining a self-image that prevents us from expressing a full range of emotions? And you can just free associate. We don't want
Yeah, yeah,
want to like come up
yeah.
with a definitive answer.
Yeah, I mean, immediately I feel like, I mean, first thoughts, I'm agreeing and I'm saying yes, because just from my experiences of people, saying making comments after my anger, uh, that's not like you and so on. But then I've always had the opposite, right? Like pushing me to change in terms of like, you need to say something. Um, but then again, those people that say that encourage me to say something like, stand up for yourself, they also haven't seen me upset before. So there's that missing element.
You can't
um,
handle the truth.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's that missing element, and it's always been a weird relationship with this anger, because people would like to say actually that, um, just because of my consistency, right, with my self-image, uh, that perhaps I'm not a very assertive or whatever individual. But the thing is, for me, it's not that I fear. It's interesting that the interpretation gets looked at this way in terms of interactions, right? Because from the outside, they look at me as someone that can't stand up for themselves, right? But for myself, that's not the battle that I'm fighting. The battle that I'm fighting is, I don't want people to see it. I
Mm,
don't want them to see me like this,
mhm,
and it's one of those things where I actually find the latter to be worse, rather than, and I will take the hits, um, to protect that little area of myself that I don't want people to see, which is
mm,
which has always been a very interesting thing for me, because um, and then what happens is I get a conflict of emotions, or a conflict of, what should I do? Should I show them that I can stand up for myself, uh, or should I just protect what I've been trying to protect, so I don't let people see, this thing, right? This anger.
mm,
Uh, and so for me, it's always been conflicting, whether it seems like the self image is something that it has been just kind of ironically been imposed on the outside, um, but the what I'm trying to protect has also a product of the things that have been said.
mhm,
Because I remember in my childhood, I don't remember it being so guilty and shameful in terms of being upset.
mm,
Um, so
mhm,
that is one thing that I would say in the beginning of childhood, I don't think I had that kind of relationship to my anger. I would just get upset. I mean, it was never a good type of upset, clearly, because the results of the telling of like, I shouldn't act like this and so on. Um, and I realized, I think, as a child, that the only way I was going to get attention in a good way is if I behaved. I
mhm,
didn't act out. Um,
mhm, mhm,
so you could say there's still a very primitive, or not primitive, but very infantile way of expressing that anger, because I decided to just put it in a little container, and
mm,
and try not to use
mm, mhm,
it.
mhm. So the expression of anger would be associated with kind of detachment from the other person, the source of affection. Well,
Mhm.
so, yeah, that's really interesting. I want to segue into your discussions, your work on dating, because I think
Mhm.
it is at a deeper level, it is related to that. Your critique of dating, the dominant dating models, the dating narratives, what people fall into, uh, also has these elements in it. Like you have talked about how dating involves management of images. Like when people date, they want to like construct and maintain an image, and then want an image from the other person. They justify why they are with the other person based on the image of the other person. And then there is this step-by-step process that we believe that should happen in a dating
Yeah.
scenario. Again, this is the structure, and any deviation from that is kind of like the expression of anger. It is like, whoa, where is this where did this come from? And your kind of solution to that, your proposal, the way you propose to address this dating scenarios is to kind of let things come out. If I understood you correctly, you like to have a situation where two people encounter each other, and then without filter, without expectations about what is supposed to happen or what images we're going to construct, let things come out, whatever comes to their mind. And in that sense, I feel like it is kind of related to a freer, more liberated form of emotional expression. And of course, the presupposition here is that the other person will not run away if you just keep doing it. Just like how the expression of anger will not result in the other person withdrawing or withholding attention.
Yeah, I agree with that, because that is like the presupposition with my own anger, isn't it? In terms of like, I am afraid, you could say, I mean, like, I'm deathly afraid that if I express this, it will change everything. It will, people will withdraw from me, and relationships will end. But actually, I mean, that hasn't always been the case, and I think that has rarely happened, I believe. I mean, it does cause some distance, but perhaps that was a distance that was needed from the beginning. I mean, I don't know, and that's something that perhaps if I was doing what I have been talking about with dating, if I had allowed myself more free, revealing, just allowing myself to be revealed. And I think that's what's so difficult about dating already, is that, the whole idea of meeting up, it already sets up the scene and everything, right? It automatically, you catch yourself like, dressing up, combing your hair, and it just like programs you to already be playing out that image. And it's very hard to break character. Let's just throw that in there. It's very hard to just break character in the middle of this meeting with a person, right? And the thing that is really, you could say, it perpetuates the character, is the questions that we ask each other when we first meet each other. Like, what do you do? Oh, I do this. But the thing is, like, that my job doesn't really say anything about who I am. Not really. You could say, oh, so you're in the army. Okay. Oh, so this is what you do. Okay. Yeah. And then ask like your movies and stuff. But again, this only further links your supposition that all these things are you, right? That I like these shows, I like these foods, and it just contains that self-image again, and it never provokes a sort of breaking out of character. Not once, right? Because we're all just feeding each other what we have constructed as a self-image, and that's what we get to know, and that is what is that's what first dates are. And that's what, and it doesn't have to be dating. It can just be just meeting people in general, like introduction, right? You're talking about your character. And it's very hard to just break from that. And oftentimes I actually hate small talk, and the reason why I hate small talk is because of exactly this, what I just described, that it's only self-images that we're talking about. We're not talking about anything substantial. But it seems like, unfortunately, the presupposition is that the other person is going to engage in that breaking away of the character, or that they're going to enjoy that, right? Because you do need some way in the conversation, and not everybody is ready, or not everybody is welcoming to the idea of just jumping in and starting the conversation in a deep way, because I've heard this say before, right? Like, I barely know you. I don't even know your name, and we're talking so deep about things, right? And for me, I'm like, it doesn't matter. I don't. It to some degree, I don't need to know your name. To some degree, right?
Right.
Because the conversation's so good,
Mhm. Yeah, what do you think about this? As I was listening to your description of character and breaking character, I was reminded of this. I don't know if it is a type of person, but it's at least a type of behavior that we describe as cool. So how is a person cool? What kind of people are we inclined to describe as cool? And maybe something like cool is when a person doesn't reveal a character completely, which then allows them not to have to break out of character. So let's say I ask you about your favorite TV shows or your favorite movies or favorite books. If you very enthusiastically jump in and respond like, oh yeah, I loved the Inception or Tenet. But if instead of you act in a more detached way and say, yeah, I have some favorite movies, but I don't care that much. That coolness doesn't allow me to, like, it prevents me from associating you very strongly with like a movie buff, or then you don't have to be consistent with anything because you have maintained that so-called cool. I don't know if there are better ways of describing that behavior.
It's something that I call the elusive dating subject.
Mhm.
That is what is you can say that is what is attractive. A lot
Mm.
of people like to some degree in
Mhm.
terms of like it's because it goads them on to want to further try to discover who you are uh,
Right, right.
and what you're like. Um, Interestingly enough, I have run into some women that were so they like the in my experience. So there's some. I think this has to do with a specific type as well, where there's a specific type that wants to know immediately exactly how you are and how you act and how you behave. And I feel like that actual response is because they want some kind of determination about who you are immediately, right? They want to either be like, okay, he's good to go in terms of me dating him, or he's nixed, he's got to go. I don't want to waste my time.
Mm. Could be.
Um, and so I've I've experimented with this in terms of how I responded to these types of people, and it seems to be the case that if I'm willing to provide all that information, it just um, it doesn't seem like it's going to work out actually.
Yeah,
And
that
I
was what I
remember,
was thinking. Because it's almost like a challenge
yeah,
to not reveal, to resist that. But you only the right response is to not give those answers. Sorry, I interrupted you.
no, you're good. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's to not give those answers. And I remember another woman doing the same thing to me, and I immediately cut her off, and I said, if you keep going this way, you're going to ruin it for yourself.
Wow. Yeah.
uh, I was like, I don't think we should ever be prying for that much information immediately or like in any substantial manner. And I think that's perhaps why I'm just like, uh, it's funny when I talk to my mother would be like asking all these good questions about, well, do you know what she does? I'm like, no, I don't know actually. Well, she's like, well, what do you know? And I'm like, well, I mean, I know that we had a good conversation. You
Hmm.
know? uh, and
Hmm.
it's something that I've noticed that like those specific questions that people are obsessed about, I'm not obsessed about.
Hmm.
Like I could, it feels almost cruel to say when I say this, but it's like I don't care about people's favorite color. I don't care about a lot of people's favorites. I care about um, how you perceive life, you know, and what that means to you.
Hmm.
Um, but I have been proven wrong before in terms of I met one woman where she actually made this was I think to me it's still a strange ability, but she made the mundane very magical. It was just very strange. I don't know how else to describe it in terms of magical, but she had no uh, deep views on anything, at least from my interpretation, no deep views. But this revealed to me that her notion of mundane and the way she would tell me about her day was always exciting. I don't know how to explain it. Like typical conversations like, how are you? How was your day? These are kind of very mundane conversations to have. But every time I would converse with her about each other's days, it was just always very enlightening and enlivening. I don't understand. And this was something that sort of bypassed my perception of having deep conversations, right? This is when I found my refutation.
Mhm.
And that
Mhm.
was
Mhm.
very strange to me. So that's why I took the notion of letting things reveal themselves as they want to be revealed, as they should be revealed, rather than kind of imposing anything. Because as much as people would impose a sort of blunt, small talk conversation, I would also be imposing like, no, I want a deep conversation. I want, long talks and stuff like that. So I realized that if I'm going to talk to somebody, the course will decide itself. If we end up talking a long time, then we talk a long time. If it's a blunt conversation, it's a blunt conversation. There's nothing else to be said.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So,
And the depth of the conversation doesn't necessarily have to be determined by the topic. That's
mhm.
actually one of the reasons I enjoy your YouTube channel, is because you take, literally mundane means worldly, this worldly. So mundane topics are topics that are worldly, like life, relationships, emotions. And the way we handle these topics could have depth if we stay with them long enough, maybe, and if we apply the right approach or attitude. Or but yeah, the thing that is, it's interesting, the way we admire good qualities in other people, it could be a projection of things that we also are cultivating at the same time. So
Mhm.
I see this quality in you and your presentations as well, this bringing depth and life into topics that are not necessarily or immediately associated with philosophy, or I don't know. And one other thing that I wanted to bring in, maybe this would be the last element, is in relation to emotions, anger. When my wife expresses anger to me, I experience that as a moment of intimacy, and I love it. I get so excited, and actually, she sees that as a little bit weird. It's like, why are you so excited that I'm angry? It's like, because this is like you're bringing some new material into our ongoing conversations, our ongoing interactions and relationships. And when we have spent enough time with someone, it becomes a special case. Anger is not as scary anymore. It actually, our excitement about it and our appreciation of it kind of like diffuses it of its threatening elements. Um, and that could be a self relationship as well, something that you trust yourself. I trust myself, and I say, even though I feel like I might lose this relationship, but I'm going to trust the truth. I'm going to trust uh, my commitment to the truth to, in the long term, protect me and not let me be completely isolated. And that, I see in that the kind of religious sentiment. It's like you're trusting something beyond here and now, beyond this particular relationship, and you're committed to that, and you let that take care of. You let that commitment take care of some of the challenges and worries and concerns, um, and you let that commitment be expressed in, as opposed to keeping this relationship.
Yeah, so yeah, I like what you said there, in terms of like, because they're revealing something there, um, some type of intimacy. The funny thing enough, it must have to do. I think it must be like what you said, right? It must be somewhat connected with our own relationship to anger, right? Because when I see somebody else angry, I'm like, yes, in terms of like, I want to know if you're angry, but it's that ironic part where it's like, I don't want people to know I'm angry, right? But strangely enough, uh, when I draw the line between friendships and then someone that I'm having a relationship with, strangely enough, I there is that, it's strange, like you said, in terms of like there is that feeling of something greater than itself, because I no longer look at it as, especially like between friends, where I am dreading to show my anger. But in terms of like the actual relationship, I tell myself, for the sake of the relationship, of of this, I have to express this anger. I have to show it, because if I don't, I know that something is on the line here.
Mm,
um, but it has always intrigued me that I don't also do that with friendships. you know
mm,
I only do that with people that I am in a relationship with, because I feel like for the sake of the relationship, I have to show you this. I have to
mhm,
reveal to you this. I have to show you this anger, because if not, I know on the road it will destroy the relationship.
mhm,
I know that it will.
mhm,
So it's best that I show you immediately and now.
mhm,
Um, and there is a faith kind of element where it's like, if she leaves, she leaves, but I have to show her, because if I don't, I know it will be way worse, in terms of the repercussions and the things that will be said that can't be taken back. Um, and we never know exactly how someone is going to respond, and how they will keep things in mind afterwards.
mhm.
Um,
And just thinking about that, how much it revises the story if you reveal
mhm,
something late. And it's like, you know what? I've been angry about this for the past 2 years. And the other person has to like go back and revise the whole, like all the episodes. It's like, oh,
mhm,
so that day you were feeling not as your overt expressions suggest, but something else.
mhm.
It can be quite unsettling and disorienting for the other person too. Yeah. And do you think that we don't give people enough credit when we don't express a wide range of emotions, including anger? Like, I, if I'm angry at you and I don't express it, is it partly because I think that it will be difficult for you to reconcile the contradiction? Like, you might not be able to fit these two parts, the cheerful person and the angry person. Like, how could those two both be, part of the same person? Like, in that sense, we might not give people enough credit when we withhold parts of ourselves.
Yeah. I think it might have to do with that. But it's funny because I recently read a quote from Deleuze in Guattari where it really stuck with me. He said, "No one dies from contradiction. No one
Wow.
dies from contradiction." And I thought about how I was behaving, and I thought, wow, my behavior is a sort of survival type of behavior, in terms of like, I really feel like I'm going to die from this contradiction. you know? uh, and perhaps that's the part where it gets really nonsensical, where I really do feel like I'm going to die from this contradiction.
Mhm.
Um, and it's also kind of humorous, because it's like, it's silly to think that you're going to die from contradicting yourself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we only make statements like that about things that we feel like we might die from them, like implicitly.
Yeah.
That's why that's the justification behind the code. Nobody's gonna die from it,
Yeah.
even though we might feel that we would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It always feels like a very impending type of death.
Mm,
But it's true. I mean, when Deleuze said this, it's you're not going to die from contradicting yourself.
mhm,
It's always, it's interesting enough. Um, it does feed it into the other person's mind that this is a part of you, which is a very interesting way to look at contradictions. Um, because it's like, it seems like a contradiction never happens simultaneously, at the same time, especially with yourself, at least. It's like there's only a part. Uh, it's like, in this moment, I am angry, I am upset. Uh, to compare me to the later is, yes, a contradiction, but it's never going to be a contradiction in terms of that moment and that time. Uh, and so it's interesting that once that person accepts that that's a part of you, um, it's not really a contradiction anymore, because they just go, well, he gets upset when this specific thing happens, or he gets
mm,
upset when this happens.
mhm,
So it's interesting that I think, and I believe, when I begin to feel upset, that I am contradicting myself, that I'm destroying my self-image. It's very interesting that I think that, when really, like you said before, it's what I'm really revealing is that this is, a part of me. I do get upset. Certain things upset me, and this is not really a contradiction of self-image. This is just something that hasn't been shown to people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. The closer, I think, the closer we are to individuals, the less we rely on theories about them and images of them. Like my close friends, close family members, I don't rely on theories to explain them. And even to the point where I would say, okay, this is the situation where they are going to feel this way about, for this reason. Of course, we act on these beliefs, but there shouldn't be, I mean, not organically, we let go of the unifying theories of the person that would remove all traces of contradiction. That is a very, like a stranger kind of attitude. Like we do that with strangers or with people who are on the other side of some boundary, and we have theories about them to manage our uncertainties about them, to make them less scary. The fact that we don't know them less scary.
Mm. Yeah, that video you shared on Twitter, I believe, with the marriage couple in therapy, and the one is being very rational.
Right.
I thought that was such a good example of how psychologically dismissive someone who perhaps practiced rationality or practices philosophy can be, because I noticed that I could do this in a very destructive way in a relationship, right? I can just always, attempt to destroy every premise the other person provokes in me in the relationship itself. And that's just very, it's like, yes, you can be philosophically correct, but it's not going to improve your relationship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's like the dark side of being a nerd. If my wife asks me a question and then in response, I say, define your terms, please. I was like, what is that? That's totally inappropriate and rude. And like non-seductive and non-intimate, like all those things that we want to have in an intimate human moment. All those things are removed with that knee-jerk reaction of the nerd. I mean, there's a positive side to being nerdy, but that's the dark side.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah.
It reminded me because I remember I had talked to a woman that wanted to. She uh, she was trying to get me to like diagnose her in some kind of fashion, in some type of psychological way. And because she was also trying to prove to me that she's also read a lot of psychology. And then she was, ironically enough, she like diagnosed one of my behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I was like, this is, I was like, this is not enjoyable in any fashion. And this is why, even though as much as I read philosophy and as much as I enjoy psychology, I draw a very big line in terms of personal relationships. I do not entertain the idea of ever imposing any kind of theory on someone. If we're just having like a casual conversation, I could be like, well, Carl Jung would say this, or maybe Freud would say this, or Nietzsche would say this. But I would never be like, oh, this is your shadow. You're projecting. I just
Yeah. In other words, I think, we forget sometimes that philosophy is supposed to serve humans, not the other way around. It's not human life that is designed to serve philosophy, to be subservient to philosophy. It's really, for me, interesting and a little bit sad to hear all these stories. And when I was dating, I had this experience a lot. So much of what happens, so much of what people do in dating and relationships is to set up traps that they don't want to fall into. They don't want the other person to fall into that trap. Instead of trying to construct something, to create something, they kind of impose something like a theory, like challenges, and they want the other person to transcend that, to overcome that, to not fall into the trap that they're so obviously laid out. It's like, no, I'm going to refuse. And then when you refuse, they're going to say, wow, okay, you are special. But why even take that route? I don't get it.
Yeah. That's something that's something like well, you will see that I have sent you something in terms of how I look at the dating game itself, but it's something that, I mean, I've looked at the dating game itself as something everybody takes as a sort of presupposition from the beginning. And everyone, it's just normal to set up like these little traps.
Mm.
But this is all the dating game itself is a product of things from it's accumulation from just history itself. And but the thing is, it's so ingrained that we just take it as a given. We take it so easily as a given, and then it seems like there is no true dating in terms of real creating something, creating moments, because all we're doing is playing defensive, right? We're like playing like a defense tower game, right? I'm setting up this trap here and I'm setting this trap here. See if you fall into it, and if you fall into it, then you're not the one for me.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And it's like that's not how I want to get to know you.
Yeah. Yeah, we can get more into that in future conversations. Like that's a way of defining the one negatively. Like I know that I don't want to be with people who fall into my traps. I'm going to push as hard as I can to get to know all your information, figure out everything about you in the first meeting. And this is a trap, actually, deep down. If you give me all the answers, it's not going to work because you won't be the one, because I don't want to know. The one is somebody that I cannot know in one meeting or something like that. Strange. Yeah. Javier, thank you so much. We are at the hour mark. I look forward to future conversations. Again, for people who are listening, please check out Javier's great YouTube channel. It's full of life, full of interesting insights. And he does almost all of it, or most of it, live, like one take, live streaming, which is very impressive. All right, Javier, I'm going to stop recording. Okay. And then